Hey, everybody, and welcome to 11 Questions Special Edition. I'm Milton Davis, your host, and I'm very excited because I'm going to be interviewing a person that I've known for a long time. We've been running the streets together in this literary place for a long time. So, hey, ladies and gentlemen, Gerald L. Coleman. Hey, Gerald, how you doing?
Yeah. What's up, brother? Good to be here, man. Thank you for the invite. And it's always good to chop it up with you, the veteran OG, the brother who knows what he is and what isn't. Uh, and so
Well,
yeah, it's good to be here with you, man, as always.
always, man. I tell you guys, any of you that's been around me and Gerald, conversations can go for a long time, and especially because Gerald over there, he's relaxed and settled in. So, but we're gonna try to keep this to a reasonable length of time so you guys get to know Gerald a little better. I'm gonna start off by reading his bio, and by looking at it, I mean this thing could use a table of contents. That's how long it is.
Bro, read as little of that as you want, bro. You don't have
No,
to go down
I'm
through all of that.
I'm gonna read it all because the people need to know. So we're gonna read this. So, Gerald L. Coleman is a philosopher, theologian, poet, and science fiction and fantasy author. He did his undergraduate work in philosophy, English, and religious studies, followed by a master's degree in theology. He is the author of the epic fantasy novel series, The Three Gifts, which currently includes When Night Falls, Book One, A Plague of Shadows, Book Two, and the upcoming When Chaos Reigns, Book Three. His speculative fiction has appeared in the cyberpunk anthology, The City, the Roaring Lion anthology, Rococo, the urban fantasy anthology, Terminus and Terminus 2, the 2019 Jordan Con anthology, You Want Stories, Dark Universe, Bright Empire, Cyberpunk by MV Media, the Jordan Con 2022 anthology, Neither Endings Nor Beginnings, Weather Change, The Revolution Will Be Weird, and the upcoming World Fantasy Award-winning Year's Best African Speculative Fiction 2022. His essays appear in the Polish language Con magazine,
Don't even
Conversage.
don't even don't even try and pronounce that. I can't pronounce it myself.
Okay, we'll skip over that. Apex Magazine 127 and the Hugo nominated fanzine Journey Planet. His poetry has appeared in Pluck, the Journal of Affrication Arts and Culture, Drawn to Marvel, Poems from the Comic Books, Pine Mountain, Sand and Gravel, Volume 18, Black Bone Anthology, the 10th anniversary issue of Diode Poetry Journal, About Place Journal, Starline, Volume 43, Issue 4, and This is the Honey, an anthology of contemporary Black poets. He has been a guest author at DragonCon, BossCon, Blacktasticon, JordanCon, Atlanta Science Fiction and Fantasy Expo, SausageCon, the Outer Dark Symposium, World Horror Con, Imaginarium, Multiverse, Weird Bites, Nikon, and a guest poet lecturer at Berea College, University of Kentucky, Center College, Governor School, Transylvania University, Western Carolina University, UNC Charlotte, Florissant College, Kenyon College, the Carnegie Center for Literature and Learning, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Cultural Center. He is a Scholastic National Writing Junior and co-founder of the Affrication Poets, a science fiction and fantasy writers association member, a Risling Award nominee, and a fellow at the Black Earth Institute. His new releases include a collection of science fiction and fantasy short stories entitled From Earth and Sky, and a collection of poems and micro essays entitled On the Black Hand Side. You can find them at geraldcoleman.com. Thank y'all for coming to the video. We're glad you were here.
Good night, everybody.
As you can see, Gerald is an accomplished author and poet, and he has I met him because I read his stories, his Three Gifts series, and it was the first what I consider sword and soul epic fantasy that I've ever read. But before we get into this, I have a question that came to me as I was reading over his bio. And my question is, how does a theology major become a fantasy writer?
Wow, man. It's interesting because from the time that okay, let me back up a second. You've had this experience, right? You sit down, you write this novel, right? The first book that I wrote, I'd been writing poetry since I was in college, but the first, novel, epic fantasy, uh, When Night Falls. So I write this. So you write this novel, and you type the end, and then you're sitting at your desk, and you're like, okay, what in the world do I do now? Right? Um, and you have these conversations with new writers, with aspiring writers, with other writers, and there's always this kind of preconceived notion that's it. That's all you got to do. You just got to write this great story, and you can, you know, wash your hands and you're done. But you and I know that once you type the end, that's the beginning. Like you haven't even really gotten started yet. We think that the writing of the story is kind of the up and the down, the beginning, the middle, and then the end. But that's really just the very beginning. And you're asking yourself, my goodness, okay, so what happens now? And so I got I jumped. One of the first things I did was I jumped online, and I thought, because I knew that I needed to find a community, right? One of the things that being a co-founder and a member of the Appalachian Poets taught me, and let me just as an aside for those who are watching this who are from Appalachia, and there's this that some of you may not know, but there's this kind of internal friction about whether you pronounce it Appalachia or Appalachia. And you have those gatekeeping folk who say, oh, the only authentic way to pronounce it is Appalachia, and therefore the we're supposed to pronounce our name Affrilacha. I've never pronounced it that way. I always pronounce it Affrilacha. A good friend of mine who's also co-founder of the Appalachian Poets and who coined the phrase Appalachian, Frank, basically took the word African and the word Appalachia and synthesized them together to create this word called Affrilacha, which was really about saying there are Black folk here, and there have always been Black folk here, and we have a part of this heritage, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that gifted me with is an understanding of how important that community was to me as a poet and as a developing poet. And so I knew that, okay, I've got this novel and I'm writing science fiction and fantasy now, and I need a community. I know I need to find some like-minded people who are on the same journey that I'm on, because I understand how beneficial that is to be a part of that kind of community. So so I'm like, okay. And so you're thinking, how in the world are you going to find other Black folk who are writing science fiction and fantasy, right? So one of the first things I did was I jumped online and I jumped on Facebook and I typed in Black science fiction and fantasy, right? And lo and behold, in that little small list, there was this Facebook group called the State of Black Science Fiction 2017? I know we later on dropped it, but it was 2017, right?
In 2012.
2012. I'm sorry, 2012. And so I'm like, okay, join, right? And so then I jumped in and started kind of reading through, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there are all these people who are interested in Black science fiction and fantasy. And you were one of the admins, you and Balagoon. And so, just in posting stuff and responding to stuff, and we started to respond to stuff, and then this interesting little experiment happened. I really think this is kind of what was the culmination of you and I making a connection, because you posted this Black science fiction image and you wrote this little excerpt. You wrote this little kind of from a first person perspective. Like this little science fiction kind of excerpt of what might be a broader story, but it was just you kind of doing a jazz kind of riff. I was like, oh, okay. I like that. I like that. So I went and found an image and I posted an image and I did the same. I wrote this, which actually ended up becoming the kind of seed of my story, which ends up in the anthology. And the next thing you know, we're looking on here and other folks are like, oh, I want some of that gravy. Boom. And folks are putting images with little stories that this little mini flash stories that I guess we were doing flash fiction. Yep. Who would write these little bits of flash fiction. And you were like, man, okay, we need to do an anthology. We're like, okay. And so it was somewhere around in there that you reached out and you were like, okay, there's another brother who's doing what I'm doing. It seems like he might be able to write a little something. And you invited me to coffee. We went down to this coffee shop in down in around, not downtown Atlanta, but down in Atlanta over by Georgia Tech. Sat down and I gave you a copy of the book, the first novel, and from there we just kind of, we kind of began to kind of talk about our experiences. And I'm saying all of this to get to this point, which is the more you and I talked, and then the more we started to appear on panels with other Black authors who were talking about their kind of background, how they got to writing science fiction and fantasy, I think a theme emerged. And it was the same kind of a very similar story among all of us, that we were all very, at first and primarily, readers of science fiction and fantasy. But we didn't see ourselves in any of the stuff that we'd been reading for the last, since we were kids. And so we knew that once we got to the point where we wanted to sit down and write, that we were going to write the stories that weren't available for us when we were looking for science fiction and fantasy with people in it that look like us. And so I knew that when I sat down to write this epic fantasy series, that the hero was going to be somebody who looked like me. Not exactly like me, but who was Black, who I could relate to. And so that's kind of how I got there. I mean, the academic stuff really didn't have any connection to it, because I had always been reading this stuff from the time I was a little kid, all the way through and up to the point where I would hurry up and finish my work in class in high school so that I could read whatever novel I was currently had my nose in the back of the class, and I would get, teachers who came up to see what I was doing because they thought I was shirking my work. But I was basically with my nose in the book, holding up my paper for them while I'm still reading, like, here, take this, because I did my work. But I'm reading this novel right now. Don't bother me. And the same thing happened in college. While I was reading Wittgenstein and Sartre and Derrida and Kant and all of this stuff that I'm being assigned by my philosophy professors, or reading all the stuff that I'm being assigned by, Shakespeare and early Western literature, American Western literature, about the pioneering white, protagonist who goes out west. They're forcing me to read all of this other stuff. I'm reading science fiction and fantasy in my free time, right? And so that was around before philosophy and theology even showed up. And so for me, the literary thread through my entire life is speculative fiction, right? I mean, the other stuff was an intellectual pursuit, and certainly important to me. But the kind of the longest running thread for me, literarily anyway, is speculative fiction. So it was. I'm sure you have a similar story. It was always there, in the background, right? Yeah.
Well, the thing that I like so much about the three gifts is because I tell a lot of people I'm probably one of the most illiterate people when it comes to like old school science fiction and fantasy. I didn't get into it until I was in college, and a lot of the classics I didn't read. I mean, I'll be honest, I never read The Wheel of Time and some of the other epic fantasy series. But looking at the three gifts, I like the fact that you're building this epic world, and it's around this, like you say, this Black main character and this group that he has that are kind of like, I would say, they kind of keep the peace. They keep the peace. They keep the balance. And some of the things that you created, some of the images that you created are images that I'd never seen, in a at that time in a black fantasy, in a fantasy book. And I think there was one particular scene we talked about when your main character goes back to his home city, and you describe him, arriving at the city. And I mean, I had never read anything like that. I mean, there was so much, it was so majestic and proud. And sometimes I think that when, in the past, when we as black readers, black writers were going through certain systems, that I'm not going to say things like that weren't allowed, but I was saying that they were discouraged. And we were steered to talk about certain subjects, and those subjects were always, I say, I don't want to use the word struggle, but again, that's what it is. And
Right.
To see something written in the book with such unadulterated pride, like you would see in referral to, say, if you were writing about an African kingdom like Kemet or Songhai, and to see that from that point of view was really striking to me. And it's one of the things that I like about that series, and one of the reasons why I'm waiting anxiously for the third book is because of the way that you've been writing these books, and how you take the time. Your descriptions are meticulous, and you take the time to build the visions, the visionary part of this world as well, which is something that's really important in epic fantasy.
Yeah.
So you're taking all the standard things that you do in epic fantasy, but you're grounding it in that Afrocentric base, and culture and stuff like that. And I think it's really unique, especially at the time when you did it. Now we're seeing things open up, and we're seeing authors getting more freedom from a mainstream standpoint to play in those play in those areas.
Right.
But at the time that you were doing it, it was something that was, the time that you started doing it was really unique and stuff, And
man, I take that as high praise coming from you, because you've been in the game for a minute. You have a following. You're a great writer who has written some really powerful and amazing stuff. I think Changa's Safari is a must read for anybody who's interested, not just in black science fiction and fantasy, but who's interested in science fiction and fantasy, period. And so, yeah, man, I take that as high praise, coming from you. It was important to me because, when you read, and I did read all that stuff from the time I was a little kid, and, a lot of these, particularly like you said, when you're talking about epic fantasy, there are these great, amazing cities, right? Cities that are for magic users, or cities for elves or dwarves, or all of these other races of men, which are always basically white. And I'd never seen anyone kind of give us that kind of image, a vision to look at. And so it was really important to me that once I got the character to kind of this secondary world's basically representation of Africa, that that we have some of those same experiences, so that when he goes to one of the great cities, right? And they're called great cities for a reason, right? There are these massive, majestic places where Black folk live, right? Under their own auspices, ruled by themselves, with their own culture and their own world that nobody dares. I was going to use a different word. Nobody dares mess with, right? Because they don't play. They don't play that. You get your little army together and try to go to Alicaz and see what happens, right?
And that's the beauty of that. I mean, that's the beauty of what you're writing and stuff, and to have those images there. I think visually nobody I have not seen anything, and did not see anything to me that I feel like matched that level until the first Black Panther movie, and
Wow.
they introduced Wakanda. You
Yeah.
know, and and up to that point, I mean, to write about it with such confidence and write about it with that strength, is something that I feel like, what you bring to the table, in addition to the story itself, which I'm hoping this will tease people enough to where they'll go get these books because I want them to read these books like I read them. I mean, and for people who like long epic type fantasy works, this is the Three Gifts is a perfect series to pick up and take a look at. If you can kind of give everybody like a brief synopsis of what it is, what the story is about, so they can at least tease them a little bit more.
Well, basically, it's very much what I tried to do is to write something that was very much in the very classic vein of an epic fantasy, right? Where you have the big bad who wants to cover the lands in the second darkness, right? And then you have these other characters, and for me it was important that particularly in the first book that the characters are not. Let me put it another way. There are other epic fantasies where, from the very beginning, there are characters who, if it's not the protagonist, it's characters around the protagonist who already know what's happening and are basically trying to usher the hero into this fight against the big bad dark one, right? Yeah. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write a story where the characters have their own issues and their own things that they are dealing with, and to give you an opportunity to experience the world. I love world building. I that's one of my favorite things. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to experience the world. And then as the series progresses, then you find out this bigger, larger thing that is going to happen that the heroes have to face. I didn't want the whole story to kind of be preoccupied with that. I wanted that kind of simmering in the background so that when you get to a certain point down the road in the series, oh, now you're these people that you've gotten to know through all of these other experiences are now having to face, oh, well, there's the big bad, and there's this other thing, and we've got to deal with that. And if you read the first book, you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about. But it's very much some of the themes that I love in fantasy. Is very much found family. I love found family, right? Where you have people who are basically outcasts who come together and they create their own family, right? And it's very much what the People's Company is really all about. And the People's Company is very much also all about, hey, look, if you don't have anywhere else to go, if there's nobody else who's going to take your side, if there's some injustice that has been done against you, and there's nobody else who's going to help you, you can come to Sanctuary and knock on the door. And there are these group of people who are interested in that. They are interested in goodness. They are interested in light. They are interested in trying to make the world a better place, even when the world is full of all of this ugliness. And so that was really important to me. And so that's kind of what the first book kind of focuses and gets your feet on the ground to help you understand kind of what's going on around the hero and why the hero does what the hero does. And then as the book progresses, you get to kind of some of my favorite stuff, where, as you were saying, the hero has to go back home for a particular reason. And now you get immersed in all of this blackness, right? This culture that is, for me, that's a love letter to Africa, right? In an epic fantasy setting. And so you get to experience these different cultures, because there's a warrior culture that he's a part of, and then there's what you were talking about, the great cities that kind of exist kind of outside of that, but in connection with it. And so they're all, I kind of try and hit some of the kind of you know hallmarks of what I consider great fantasy, but do it in a way that's kind of, at least I think, that's different and unique, and that's very much about and it's not just. And I really set out to make it very multicultural, because that's the other thing you'll find out as you're reading, that the People's Company is peopled with all kind of folk from all kind of places, right? They're black and brown and golden, and folk from all kinds of different walks of life and different cultures that come together in this kind of found family. And they, there's some other interesting special things about them, but read it and you'll find that out. But it's really, for me, the series is a love letter to that 18, 19-year-old kid who was in the bookstores in the science fiction and fantasy section, looking for science fiction and fantasy, especially fantasy books that he could see himself in, and that I wish was on the shelf when I was looking.
There's one more thing I will say about this, and then I want to talk about some of your other books. That struck me is that, to me, the strength of your main character is because of the fact that, and the confidence that he has, is because he knows where he's from, and he knows the world that's behind him, and he knows when he goes into all these other situations, he's very confident of who he is and where he's from, and that's where he draws the strength from.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, back in the day when I decided to start studying, African culture and history and stuff like that, I kind of found that same foundation. I've always been, to me, it's always very important to know where you're from, as a person growing up in the South, and being close to my family growing up. That was my initial foundation. But then that secondary foundation came from knowing my deeper roots and knowing, the origin and knowing about African history. And I get that same feeling when I look at your main characters, that one of the reasons that he is so confident and so solid, and the reason he can be the person that he is, because he comes from these great cities.
Yeah.
And he knows that no matter how somebody looks at him, where he is, he knows where he's from.
Right. Right.
And you can't break that.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing about that.
Yeah.
To get into some of your other books, because I'm used to your long fiction. I'm used to that, that kind of thing. But lately you've been sticking with, you've been producing books that are like shorter things, and you've been doing more poetry. And I know that's where your background from. My first experience with your poetry are the books that you let out recently, and I've always admired poets. I can't tell a poem. I can't write a poem to save my life. and I always feel like, people who are poets, it affects their prose as well. Their prose is more lyrical. It has that rhythm to it that comes from being a poet and stuff, And with your books, Nappy Metaphysics, which also kind of dips into some of your, I'll say, your broader concerns. Because you're known for being a strong advocate for equality, and
right.
You don't suffer fools lightly. Just put it that way.
Right. Right.
You will take people to task immediately.
Right.
And I feel like your poetry is the way that you express those feelings best. And I'm wondering, is that one of the reasons why you've been focusing more on poetry lately, because of maybe it has something to do with some things that you want to express right now, and this is the best way for you to express it?
It's that's probably some of it. For me, the poetry part is interesting, because for me, when I'm writing long form fiction, it allows me to take a break from writing poetry. And then when I'm writing poetry, it allows me to take a break from writing long form fiction, right? Prose. But for me, like the way that I write poetry, well, not just the way that I write poetry, but the way the collections come about, poetry collections like Nappy Metaphysic or On the Black Hand Side, it's very organic for me. Like I write poetry that is I'm either kind of thinking through something personal, or I'm responding to something in the broader culture that has happened. For example, in Nappy Metaphysics, there's a special section um, that has a suite of poems that I wrote in response to the extrajudicial murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And then, of course, Ahmaud Arbery comes along, and so for me, oftentimes it's an opportunity for me to kind of sit down and kind of deal with some of those emotions, right? And to kind of work my way through, my response and my feelings, my rage, about the kind of society that we live in and we have to endure. And so what I often do is I'll write poems and I'm just writing the poem and then I'll set it aside. And periodically, like maybe a year and a half goes by, maybe two, of doing that, writing these individual poems and kind of just setting them aside. Okay, I've written that. And and I will say to myself, oh, okay, let me go and look at this kind of pile of poems and see if there's a thread running through there. Is there a collection, right? And so then and very often there is, and then I will compile all those poems into a collection and then put that out. And so for me, that's how my publishing of poetry kind of functions. Very different from my science fiction and fantasy, which we start out saying we want to put this book together. Mm-hmm. Either we want to put this collection of short stories together, or we want to write this novel. So we set down understanding that that's the purpose. Mm-hmm. But for me with poetry, it's very different. I'm just kind of writing individual poems and not really thinking about an overall collection until I get this kind of sense that I have that this moment has come where I feel like, oh, you know what? I've probably got X number of poems over here. Let me see if there's a coherence there that I can put together into a collection. So it's a very different kind of way of approaching writing when I'm dealing with poetry, as opposed to kind of long form fiction. So yeah.
So we've been around for a minute, writing and telling our stories. Do you I'll say, what's your view on, say, since when you first started writing speculative fiction and where we are now? I mean, do you see what kind of changes do you see in, are they all positive or something negative, or what's your what's your view of the state of Black speculative fiction at this point?
I think it's a mixed bag, right? On the one hand, I think that there probably never before been, not probably, there has never before been as many options available for us as readers in terms of reading Black speculative fiction from Black authors. And that's really down to technology. That's down to how technology disrupts industries, right? It disrupted the record industry. Like, we talk about this often, that, Chance the Rapper doesn't need a record label to sign him. He didn't need that. The technology was there. He was at the right moment in the right place with the right kind of content. And so he was able to kind of write his own check, because technology gave him that opportunity that wasn't there 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you almost had to go through a record label in order to get your music out into, to be discovered. That's not the case anymore. Same thing is true of the publishing industry. I don't think we're there where kind of the record industry is just yet. I think the bigger publishing houses still have a stranglehold on the publishing industry, but they're losing it. They're losing that grip day by day, because technology is making it possible for people to say, well, that would be nice, but I'm going to go in this direction and get my stuff out in this way. And the proliferation of small and medium presses, you know, I was going to say magazines and journals, but they're having a moment right now where they're having to kind of recalibrate based on some decisions that Amazon made. But yeah, there's more opportunity, but at the same time, it's not the kind of opportunity that I would like to see us have. I would like to see us have the opportunity to have all kinds of Black mid-list authors who can make a living publishing their books and getting paid to do that in a way that white authors were able to do in the 70s and the 80s, right? There's still kind of that room for the very top 1% of people who get lucky and can kind of, boom, have that explosion that only happens to a very minute point something percent of people. And the vast majority of the rest of us are kind of having to figure this out as we go in different ways. So I think there's a lot more authors out there with a lot more stories, but we're still kind of fighting for visibility in kind of the same ways that we've always had to fight for that kind of visibility. So that's kind of the next kind of horizon for us. But we have people who are able to write. We're at a place where we can write our own stories now. Now the next thing is, how do we make sure that those stories get to see the light of day and get put in front of enough people that then those of us who are writing those stories can make a living doing it. And that's the challenge right now. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think it's better in some ways, but I think it's also very much the same struggle in other ways.
Okay. So I think part of that too is educating the reader to look at other places for what they're looking for. I see this meme that pops up all the time that says, the person says, I want to see Black fairies and stuff like that. And I'm kind of like, well, all you have to do is search on Google and you'll find them. And right. it kind of gives me the indication that these people are looking in those same places, trying to find things that that are trickling in, but it's not at the level where they would like to see them. And all they would have to do is just tilt their head slightly and they find everything they were looking for. So I think part of what you're talking about, part of that change has to be training readers or showing readers that there are other places to find this. It's just like you say with the music industry. The younger people know that they can go to these other places and find these musicians. They can go to YouTube and all these places and find them there. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now as writers, is trying to show readers that you don't have to go to these same places. There are other places, and if you go to those places, you'll find everything that you're looking for. Right. But you just have to kind of just look in a different direction.
There's another prime example that you and I know. There was a time when the only way for you to get eyeglasses was to go into a store, a physical store, and have an eye doctor give you an exam. Then you go out to the front and you find the frame that you want, and then you pick out the lenses that you want, and then you come back 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, however long it takes them to ship your stuff off, and have them made and ship them back to the store, and then you pick up your glasses. That was the only way for you to get glasses. Mm-hmm. And now we know, because we've become educated as consumers who need glasses, that we can go online and do all of that in all these other different places for much less. It doesn't cost us. And in some states, you don't even have, you can do an eye exam online. Mm-hmm. You can't do it in all states, but in some states, the technology has advanced to the point where if you don't want to, you don't have to, in most places, go into a store, a physical store, and buy glasses from the same 3 or 4 major companies who had a lock on eyeglass prescriptions. Now you can get them from all kinds of places. And we as consumers are hip to that, so we are looking for them in all these other places, and we are able, at least for me, I know, I used to be mad at the at how little options I had in terms of frames. All these ugly frames. I'm like, man, how can I get some nice looking frames, right? So now technology has advanced to the point where I can go and find frames in all kind of places online and find exactly the kind of frame that I want and buy the frame and then have the frame have my prescriptions put in the frames that I like, right? I'm not bound by limited limited selection in the optometrist office, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Yeah, as readers, we need to understand that there are all these other avenues now. We don't just have to go to Amazon, and we don't just have to get books from Simon and Schuster and Penguin, Random House, and the three or four big names in publishing. There are all these other options where people are writing all the stories we've been looking for all these years, right? They're available. Like you said, we just have to know how to go out and look in some of these other places and find them.
Yeah. So this question, where do you see Gerald L. Coleman in the next 5-10 years? What are you looking to accomplish with your work, with your writing, and with your poetry over the next few years?
I'm currently right now working on finishing up these new edited versions of the first two books in the Epic Fantasy series, and hopefully that'll be finished here shortly. And so I mean, in 5 years, I'd really like to be finished with the Epic Fantasy series. I'd like all of the books to be out because there are other stories I want to write.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got this little list of things that I'm excited to write about. But I really this epic fantasy thing is kind of like my baby. That's one of the stories that is closest to my heart, and I really want it to have kind of the best opportunity it can have to find an audience. And that was one of the reasons why I went back and did this kind of new edit and rewrite. I'm almost finished book one. I'm about to do book two, and then I can get When Chaos Reigns out, and there'll probably be, I think, two books after that. I think finishes that was called a Penta. It's a 5-book series, and so that's I'd like to have that done because there are other things that I want to turn my attention to in terms of stories that I want to write. There's a story about a Sherlock Holmes type detective based in there was a little city north of New York that was all black back in the day. It was where all black folk lived, and I wanted to write this story about this Sherlock Holmes type detective who lived in that community. And I mean, there's a whole list of stuff in terms of stories because I'm like you, I can get an idea, and I always now know to kind of write enough of a treatment down so that when I come back to it, I know exactly what the vision was that I had for that story. And so there's a lot of stuff that I want to get to, but I want to make sure that I've given the fantasy series its due and done everything I can to make sure that when people discover it, because I'm as we were saying before we started recording, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Lord of the Rings kicked around in the reading community for almost 25 years before it blew up.
Yeah.
And so I know that, particularly given the way technology is now, I know that the series will be available, be out, and be around. I don't have to worry about Simon and Schuster deciding to take it down and make it disappear, right?
Exactly.
Which is something that it's out of print. You can't get it anymore. They've done that for decades.
Yeah.
So I know that's not going to be a problem. So I want to make sure that whenever people find it, they will have the kind of experience that I want them to have in terms of reading the series. So I'd like to be done with the 3 gifts and be on to kind of writing some of the other stuff that's on my list to write. I would like to be a guest of honor at conventions. I'd like to have done some more of these guest visits to universities and colleges, and just be able to continue to be a working writer. That's really kind of my ambition.
Yeah. So I know you have something coming up pretty soon. Hopefully this video will be out before it comes up and it'll help you support it. But you're working on the hot mic session. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's it's gonna be a poetry reading. I'm gonna read poetry. I'll probably read a little bit of science fiction. Also, there'll be two guest poets who open up for me, Orchid Tierney and Jeremy Payton. Both of them are English professors who are, phenomenal writers and poets. Jeremy's also a fellow Appalachian poet. Orchid's a fellow, also another fellow at the Black Earth Institute. I think it's going to be a really great night of reading, and it's just an opportunity to do that. And people can get a virtual ticket or some of the other perks at the Indiegogo project. Yeah, it's just another it's one of those things where if you're a working writer, these are the kinds of things that you have to do to get from one point to the next to make a living, right? And this is a time of year that's really there's not a lot going on. Once you hit the holidays, things don't really kick back up until early spring, and so it's just a way of helping me kind of make it from here to there. But yeah, hopefully people will support it and be on to enjoy the night.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we put the link to that on here as well, because I heard you read your poetry when we did our Black Men reading, and it was powerful. I mean, it was like,
Thank you, man. Thank you.
By the time you were done, I was ready to run around and flip some tables and stuff like that. Stuff like that, so got a brother worked up there. But yeah, if anybody wanted to find you and find your work, where would they go to find it?
GeraldColeman.com.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
So we're going to make sure we put links up as well at the end of the video, so people will be able to get in contact with you and stuff like that. So y'all, Gerald, thank you so much for taking some time.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Sit down and talk, squad. You know how that is.
Yes, sir.
Whenever you see this gentleman at a convention, make sure you take some time, say hello, sit down and talk to him. A lot of wisdom going that way. Also make sure that you ask him what's the best bourbon drink. And he will share his knowledge and expertise with you. And if you don't drink it too fast, you won't choke. But that's another story.
Yes, sir. I'm from Kentucky. Got to represent. Don't talk to me about whiskey. Talk to me about bourbon. Yes,
there you go. There you go. So everybody, thank you guys for checking us out at 11 Questions Special Edition. I'm Milton Davis, your host. And stay tuned for more amazing interviews with amazing authors. And we'll see y'all soon. Peace.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you too, man. Peace.